All right, everybody, welcome to the Destreza lecture series. Our guest tonight is Sébastien Romagnan, and I know that I got that wrong, so would you say your name for me?
Sébastien Romagnan.
Thank
But
you.
that's very good.
It sounds so much nicer when you say it, though. Sébastien is a laureate of Philippe Errard's award of 2013 for his work on Rada's Nobleza de la espada. He's one of the few French specialists of this tradition, and he's taught Destreza for many years in Annemasse, France. He's the author of several books about the tradition, and I'm especially excited to have him talk to us because he's one of the first people to really write about Rada, and he was kind enough to do that in English. He's also done some YouTube videos, and since I've seen his work online, it's always been sort of a desire to get a chance to hear what he has to say, to get a chance to meet him. And tonight we're going to get to do both. Tonight he is up very late. He's speaking in a non-native language, and he has a European internet connection. So consider all of those things. It's for that reason we're going to ask everybody who's not the speaker to mute. And we'll take your questions from the chat. If we run into technical issues with the internet connection, we'll just be patient and we'll work through it. All right, with that, I want to turn it over to our guest and welcome.
Hello. Thank you very much for hosting me. It's a pleasure for me to be able to share about this with you. I will start by apologizing twice. First, for my English. I read English without problems, but it's not usual to me to speak it. I'm not able to think in English. I think in French, then I translate. That's why I've taken notes, and I will keep them when I will speaking with you. The good news is, if you have any interest for what I say, I will be able to send you the text. I'm going to apologize a second time. Practicing and speaking about Destreza require subtlety. I'm not always sure to be subtle enough when I do it in French, and I'm sure I'm not able to do it in English. So if sometime I seem peremptory in my presentation, it's because I'm unable to nuance what I say because of my level in English. My speech will talk about the importance of theory in Destreza in particular and in fencing in general. And I will explain why it seems so important to me to learn it. Because I think those elements are connected, I will speak about my background in fencing. In second, I will explain what is my vision of Destreza in the 21st century. In third part, I will explain why theory is so important to me. And I will finish with a catalog of what I think is essential in order to practice rapier fencing well. So let's begin with my background. I think fencing had a place in my head very early, but I discovered it late, at the age of 30 in 2006. I practiced Olympic fencing for 1 year, but the D'Artagnan that was in me was not satisfied. Then I practiced French and Italian rapier with Maestro Olivier Delannoy in Annecy for 2 years. But once again, I wasn't satisfied. I wasn't really able to explain why, but I think that for me, it was too much like Olympic fencing with a rapier. I discovered La Verdadera Destreza on a Saturday afternoon in 2009 in the 10th FISA meeting in Verbania in northern Italy. Maester Alberto Bonpredi was leading a workshop there, building from the Compendio of Eternat. The demonstration he gave us was breathtaking. His fencing was fluid, elegant, efficient. He fought without force or aggressiveness, and I immediately said to myself, I want to be able to do that. Even so, the definition of that remained to be clarified. Alberto Bonpredi's workshop was scheduled twice during the weekend. The second was scheduled for Sunday morning at 8 a.m. after the long and very drunken gala. And if my memory is right, we were 8, including Alberto and 4 of his students. I had, so to speak, a 2-hour private lesson during which I was able to take notes and ask all the questions I want. It was from this basis that I started working on Destreza. Then, as I couldn't have access to a master, I had to manage it on my own. I started the translation of Eternat because it was the treatise Master Bonpredi was working on at that time. This difficult work was completed 8 months later. Now, I like Eternat very much. I think this treatise is rich and fascinating. Its discipline sets out principles of Destreza, but it cannot by itself explain all the complexity of the system. Moreover, this work is quite conceptual. It contains just a few techniques, and today I will not advise the beginner I was to read it first. Indeed, Eternat translation brought me more questions than answers. I would have needed a master to guide me and explain it to me. So I resumed my research in order to find the treatise that will allow me to understand Destreza alone and without help. My research on internet brought me to Don Francisco Lorenzo de Rada. I don't really remember how. All I remember is that I was in Ottawa when I took the decision to translate it. It was a choice that quickly became clear to me. With its 1,500 folios in 3 volumes, this is the most complete treatise of Destreza ever written. Only Nueva Ciencia and El Discípulo Instruido de Diego Rodríguez del Canto may be compared to it. Rada did this exhaustive work 130 years after Carranza in 1705 and could draw on the work of Pacheco, Eternat or Guerra de la Vega, which preceded him. Finally, unlike Pacheco, whose work is often difficult to read, understand, and interpret, Rada's writing is clear, his descriptions are very precise, and he has a didactic thought, contrary to Pacheco, with all the respect due to the master, I will say, right as he talks. This work, begun in 2011, was completed 2 years later. Then I went from one extreme to another. I now had at my disposal hundreds pages of theory, more than 100 exercises, 32 ataros, and nearly 70 techniques to work. What was I going to do with all this stuff? Like many people, I think, I fell into the trap of technique. I was working list of technique, quarter circle thrust under the arm, estocada sarita, generales de estrechar, general de línea en cruz, general de flaqueza, and so on, without ever being able to use them nor become a better fencer. It was at that time that I understood that I was not doing the that I wanted to be able like Alberto Bomprezzi, and that I had not clearly defined the that. I realized that I wanted to be able to fight with a rapier like Pierrot Robert and Inigo Montoya in Princess Bride, or to say it more seriously, to be able to master rapier fencing. Being aware of this made me realize two things. First, Destreza would only be a mean for me to achieve this goal. And if I want to be able to do it, I would have to define also on a philosophical level how I want to approach and practice Destreza in my modern context. There is a strong continuity in philosophy, the definition of the concept, and the technical description from one treatise of Destreza to another. The great quarrel between the disciples of Carranza and those of Pacheco is, first of all, a question of discipline. It pits the Grand Master of Madrid with, again, the Andalusian Master of Arms, but not because of their conception of Destreza. Certainly, this continuity from one treaty to another, which is real, may be nuanced. Viedma, for example, has 6 general techniques, where others have only 4. The number of dignity, as well as their definition, varies according to the author. For example, I think it's in the response to the Italian fencer of Etenard. Etenard defines 6 levels of dignity instead of the 3 classic one. But this conceptual or technical difference remain marginal. The Spanish treatises have a great unity of content and are also very comprehensive. They explain fencing in a scientific and systemic way, whereas others only describe a catalogue of technique and botte secrète. Botte secrète is a French expression for a secret deadly technique. For me, Capoferro is, in my modest opinion, a good
I like the early trend, Pacameri's early material on the Etenhard too. That's very easy to digest, at least for an introduction. But I mean, I describe it kind of as a, high school geometry class is kind of where Etenhard takes those first few pages and that material. And but again, you only can get so far with it to some degree because there's only so much of it that you can trust. So. Oops, Sebastian's back.
Oh, hey, we have Sebastian again.
Excellent.
I'm back in the business. I don't know what happened.
We were ready for this. It happens sometimes with the connection from Europe. So
Okay.
the last thing that we heard was about the botta secreta, the secret thrust.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience, and thank you, Sebastian, for being diligent and showing so much fortitude, forcing your way back in. Thank you.
Thank you. I was okay. As I say, Spanish treaties have a great unity of content, and are also very comprehensive. They explain all the aspects of fencing where other treaties just explain catalog of Bota Secreta. Capoferro is, in my modest opinion, a good example of catalog of Bota Secreta. Nueva Ciencia and Nobleza de la Espada explain all the aspects of fencing and have, to my knowledge, no equivalent. This completeness is accompanied by very accurate descriptions. In Nobleza de la Espada, Rada modeled space and time to explain precisely where to place the feet, the hand, the shoulder for nearly 70 techniques. Thus, the diestra and the diestro of the 21st century are fortunate enough to have a complete theoretical, practical, and philosophical corpus, precise, stable over time, and from one author to another. These treatises, which have spared us from the question of interpreting the sources, have also distracted us from a fundamental question. How can we use Destreza in our technical, historical, and societal context? Destreza is a theory born in Spain at the end of the 16th century, which may be applied to all weapons with a blade. The content of the treatise can be the content of the treatise can be divided into three parts: the pure theory, the practical theory, and philosophy. Pure theory is a set of concepts that enable the understanding and the analysis of fencing. The first vertical plane, el medio de proporción, the strong, the weak are examples of concepts composing this theory. Theory is timeless and adapts to all context and all period. The first vertical plane is defined as the plane perpendicular to the ground that connect the spinal columns of the fighter. This definition, which has not changed since the 17th century, was true even before it was formulated and will still be true in 1,000 years. The pure theory arouses little debate among diestros. Sometimes disagreement arise on certain marginal points, but there is a rather global consensus on the definition of the concept that make up this theory. Practical theory, in the word of Maestro Alberto Bonprezzi, consists of movement and technique described in the treatise. This is theory because technique are described under what today will be called experience condition. In his explanations, Rada starts from the principle that the fighter have the same size, the same strength, the same speed, the same weapon. All those conditions are never in combat, but they allow us to train with clear explanation, leaving little space for interpretation. However, this theory is practical because, contrary to the pure theory, it is work with weapon in hand. But now a question arises. Can this practical theory be adapted to our time, and if so, how? Of course, I'm not questioning the importance of the sources, but we must be able to take a step back from it, because sources are not rule of fist. You can say it in English. Remember that according to Pacheco, you have to have brown short hairs to be a good diestro. I don't remember exactly where it is. Yeah, sorry for you, John. It's in, I think it's Grandeza de la Espada. Maybe I'm wrong, but he wrote it here, something. Our historical and technical context, is not the Spanish Golden Age. We wear protection, we wear shoes suitable for sport practice, and we fight on flat that are non-sliding. Above all, we do not die in combat. So, why not modify this practical theory to adapt it to our time? Rada did it. He developed his Destreza 70 years after Pacheco in a technical context that has changed. Whereas Pacheco used military weapon, probably side sword with short, heavy blade, Rada used Taza rapier with the long, light blade. Rada modified theory to accommodate to this change. It generalized the use of the medio proporcional defined by Álvaro Guerra de la Vega and developed the ataros from below. The ataros from below, inefficient and dangerous at the time of Pacheco because of the shape of the hilt and the weight of the blade, became essentials. They allow to follow the opponent's blade if it becomes free during an ataro, while protecting the hand thanks to the taza. The Destreza teaches how to fight effectively, and this is why Rada modified the practical theory to fight more effectively in his technical and historical context. If Rada did it, why not us? But in this case, why not integrate the Olympic fencing arrow? This is a translate from a French expression. I don't know how to call it in English. In Olympic fencing, you run toward your opponent to strike it. So, could we integrate this Olympic fencing to our technique? Effective, adapted to, thank you, Eric, La Flèche. It is effective, adapted to our technical and historical context. Can we consider La Flèche as a consider Olympic fencing as today's Destreza? Isn't Olympic fencing the most suitable form of fencing of our time? If I'm deliberately provocative in this last remark, it's because I wish to understand how to adapt practical theory without distorting it. In which case, will a technique keeps its original form, and in which cases it will be adapted. Effectiveness seems to be the most relevant evaluation criterion. Effective techniques are kept in their original form, others are adapted. But objective evaluation of this criterion is problematic because in order to determine whether a technique described 400 years ago by Pacheco is still effective today, a very high level of knowledge and mastery of Destreza is required. Just a few people have this level, and I personally haven't reached it. Effectiveness, moreover, effectiveness does not only rely on technical criteria, it depends on the context in which it is used. In other words, a technique does not have the same effectiveness according to the fencer and to the weapon. A simple example, taro and medio taro are ineffective with a small sword. As it is not the same thing with a saber. This is why, rather than evaluating technique according to their effectiveness, a criterion which is questionable, I propose to do otherwise. But before explaining my method, I would like to speak about the philosophy of Destreza, as we have done for theory and practical theory. The philosophy of Destreza include all the behaviors and attitude to adopt before, during, and after a fight. This philosophy, even more than practical theory, is intimately linked to the context of his birth. The Spanish Golden Age is a violent period in which quarrel can quickly end in bloodshed. Society set up legal and moral limits in order to avoid excesses. The goal is to prevent swordmen from slitting their throat at the slightest affront. Destreza provides a moral framework for fighting, channels the violence, and educates the hidalgos. It is opposed to violent and deadly fencing where only victory counts. Destreza proposes a self-defense fencing where the response is proportional to the aggression. It is respectful of the human life and finds its fulfillment in the movimiento de conclusión, a disarmament that neutralizes the opponent without killing him. Destreza reconciles the Christian prohibition of killing and the worldly obligation to fight. This philosophy, known to most of today's diestras and diestro, is, in my opinion, too often considered as history or folklore. It is neglected when it is not simply ignored in our way of fighting. Again, why not? Our modern context is not the Spanish Golden Age. Honors no longer have the same meaning, and fights end with a fake death. However, I think that our mistake in the way we approach Destreza lies more in the abandonment of philosophy than in all the technical transformation. This philosophy is the essence of Destreza, its DNA, which gives its meaning. Today, and it's not a judgment value, many people practice sport combat to release the tension and the violence of everyday life, to evacuate the aggressiveness accumulated during the day. Of course, this violence is socially acceptable and takes place in a framework designed to avoid excesses and injuries, but it involves ego, force, and aggressiveness to achieve victory. And in my humble opinion, this ego struggle to win is incompatible with Destreza. By adopting these behaviors, I don't think we are more than Olympic fencer with rapier. The Destreza conveys humanist values that are still relevant today. Destreza should not only make better fencers, it should make better people. So here is now my answer about the flesh. The flesh was developed to eat the opponent as quickly as possible to score a point. And it is contrary to the philosophy of Destreza. I do not think it should be added to our arsenal of technique. Now you know my objective. So Destreza is for me a mean to understand rapier fencing and my position in relation to Destreza and its current use. I'm going to propose a few ways to achieve this. Theory is something really important to me. I don't know how to explain. I know that there is different form of intelligence, and I have no sensitivity to art, for example, but I have the intelligence of the concept. When someone explains me a theoretical concept, I understand easily the implication of this concept. And this is my way of working in many aspects of my life. For me, pure theory is the grammar that allows you to master the language of fencing. As it is not possible to make a correct sentence in English or in French without knowing English or French grammar, it is not possible to make correct. A phrase d'armes, it's again a French expression to say a succession of fencing actions without mastering the fencing grammar. You can learn sentence by heart, the technique, but if these sentences are not are only of interest if they are used in the appropriate concepts. I can learn to say in English, oh, hello, my name is Sébastien, I'm 34 years old, extra. If you ask me what time is it, I know my sentence, but the context is not the good one. That's why you need to, in my humble opinion, master the grammar of fencing. But to be clear, I don't believe that one should learn theory by heart, like students in France have to learn solfège before they have even touched a musical instrument. But from the very beginning of fencing practice, diestras and diestro have to learn the main concept of destreza as soon as they discover it. I know that some people think that you have to practice first and then learn the theory. I think that both have to be worked on the same time because they feed each other. Understanding theory improves practice, and practice improves understanding theory. And there are many advantages in learning theory. Destreza is a scientific fencing. Destreza is more than a series of recipes, the technique, to be applied in a more or less empirical way. It is based, as everyone knows, on geometry and mathematical demonstration, but I don't think that its scientific characteristic is here. In fact, the masters have developed tools, plane, medial, angles, that allow the analysis of fencing. And it is because Destreza is scientific that the diestro win, even if he's older, smaller, weaker, or slower than his opponent. If the opponent is stronger, the diestro uses the lever of his weapon by placing the strong of his blade on the weak of the opponent's blade. If the opponent is faster, the diestro will force him to make larger movement than his own movement. If the opponent is taller, the diestro will keep the opponent's weapon out of his lateral defensive plane in order to approach safely. This is why Region has to raise over patience, and this is why I think Destreza is scientific, and this is why you have to understand and learn theory. Our long-term memory has two parts. A lexical module, but we will not speak of it now, and a semantic module, a semantic part. The semantic part of our long-term memory retains the meaning of the word and concept. For example, we all know the game of chess. We have somewhere in our semantic memory the concept of game of chess. It is a game played by two people. There is black and white square. You have to catch the opponent's king. Of course, this concept is more developed in the Magnus Larsson's mind than in yours or mine, but the game of chess concept is present in our semantic memory. Learning pure theory allows the assimilation of concepts beyond their simple technical description. For example, beginners learn the Ataro 1 from Rada. For him, the concept of Ataro is limited to the technical execution of Ataro 1. He knows how to do the gesture without taking care of the distance or contact. Then he will learn other Ataros from the right angle and use them in combat. Thus, his representation of the Ataro is enriched until he is able to approach it conceptually. He will know that the Ataro gives him the control of the first vertical plane and of his opponent's weapon. He will have a point of contact of superior force on his opponent's weapon, with section 3 of his blade against section 2 of the opponent's blade, with the true edge from above or the false edge from below. Thus, he will able to perform an Ataro regardless of his position or the position of his opponent, because he understands the concept of Ataro and not only, I will say, the technique of Ataro, if strictly speaking, Ataro is not a technique in Destreza. This integration in semantic memory helps to relieve the cognitive tension. Can I say this in English? Yes. So it relieves the cognitive tension. The main difficulty in fencing is to manage a complex system in constant change. Knowing theory reduces cognitive tension by relying on simple and universal principles. In my teaching, I explain very early on the first vertical plane. I want my students to know how to locate and control it in order sorry, my throat. In order to control the first vertical plane, the forward foot must point toward the opponent. Then we may distinguish four situations. As a medio de proporción, if one of the fighter is in the right angle position, he controls the first vertical plane. If the weapon of one of the fighter is in the first vertical plane and the other is not, then he controls the first vertical plane. Third situation, if the weapons of both fighters are in the first vertical plane, the one who is stronger in the position of the blade controls the plane. And finally, if neither weapon is in the first vertical plane, it is the one between the opposing weapon and the plane that controls the plane. I approach this notion first because I want the student to learn to recognize the situation in which they control the plane. Then I want them to know how to take the control of the plane when they have lost it, because controlling the plane is a sine qua non condition before carrying out a technique. Here is an anecdote that happened to me and probably happened to other diestros in their early days. Once I was fighting against someone who was adopting a low guard, an Italian guard, to say it simply. I was trying to do Ataho 1 to take the control of his weapon before doing the shoulder thrust. Every time I tried to grab the opponent's weapon, he does a liberation and attack me to the kidney. This mistake, which is quite classic among the beginners Destro, come from the fact that our understanding of the shoulder thrust from Ataho 1 is just technical. We only see the gesture without understanding the theory around which it was developed. This sequence, Ataho 1 and shoulder thrust, is only necessary if my opponent is in the right angle position at the medio de proportion, because he controls the first vertical plane. If the opponent is in a low guard position, he does not control the plane, so the Ataho is useless, because I control the plane by placing myself in the right angle position, and I can attack him directly at the shoulder or at the elbow blade. So how to set up this work with the student? This is quite simple. The student fights, I say at 80%, with prohibition to hit their partner opponent. They try, one after the other, to take control of the first vertical plane. Then we use the video. Today, everyone can film with their phone. Then it's simple to watch and analyze short sequence of fights to make stop, to locate the plane, to know in which situation we are from 1 to 4, as explained above, to see the choices you make in priority, to see the choice you never make. If the student works in group of 3, 2 fighting and 1 filming, it's simple to make real-time analysis of situation, of fight, and to see the progress. Feedback is very quickly, and it's possible to correct errors in real time. I make a small parenthesis on the video. Each time I find that I'm fighting badly, I ask someone to film a small sequence, and in general, the viewing allows me to solve my problem very quickly. And then, why I make them work this way? Because this is the most important, in my modest opinion. When students work like this, they don't think in terms of theory, but in terms of situation. They learn to recognize situation where they control the plane and situation where the opponent controls the plane. Their minds are freed from the technique, and they are from the very beginning in the analysis and observation that will later allow them to use correctly a technique. We proceed the same way with the lateral defensive plane. The defensive plane are the plane perpendicular to the ground, which joins the center of the opponent's hilt to the shoulder of the diastro. Their use is based on 2 simple rules. 1. The point of the opponent's sword must never be inside this plane. 2. The hilt of the diastro sword must never be outside this plane. To work on them, in the first exercise, the student work in pairs. One holds a large rubber band in his sword end. So, can I say sword end? Yep, thank you.
Yeah, sword end or sword tip.
Yeah. One holds a large rubber band in his sword end, which is around the shoulders of the other. Then they move around. This makes possible to materialize this plane and to see how they move. And in a second exercise, the student fight for the control of the first vertical plane while trying to apply the rule governing the use of the lateral defensive plane. Again, we use the video to analyze, and very quickly, one of the classic mistake which consists of doing big motion from left to right to push the opponent's blade or to do an ataro disappears because they are aware of this plane. They are not trying to do a technique. They're just pushing the opponent's blade to control the plane, and they try to put the opponent's blade out, the opponent's point out of their defensive plane while keeping their hilt inside their defensive plane. So when we will work later on transfer or ataro, they will have rapidly correct motion because they know that they have to do small motion with the arm to keep the hilt inside their defensive plane. The way of working around the first vertical plane and the defensive plane gives them time to think and time to act. If the Diestro controls the first vertical plane, he knows that his opponent will only be able to attack him into action. He will first have to take the control of the plane before attacking. So, if the Diestro controls the plane, he knows that his opponent's next move will be non-threatening, and therefore he can devote time to observation and decision-making. One of the advice I give to the student when we fight for real, not in training, I always said just try to control the plane, because if you control the plane, you are safe, and if you are safe, you relieve the tensions because you know that your opponent may not be able to attack you. Thus, the more the student assimilates the theory, the quicker and more relevant are their understanding and analytical capacity. The assimilation of the medio, de proporción and proporcional, allow to manage distance and angle. The control of the plane allows to create time. The assimilation of ataro. Are you still here? Yeah. The assimilation of the ataro allows to control the opponent's blade. Concept together to form fencing analysis capacity based on the three essential principles of fencing: tiempo, distancia y agregación, time, distance, and contact. In this way, the Diestro will gradually learn to read fencing to make the best use of given situation. Where a beginner Diestro sees nothing, a proficient Diestro immediately identifies the medio is standing in. He knows the lines where he can attack and those where he's threatened. He gains lots of speed because he understands at first glance the options available to him and to his opponent. I believe that you can identify a proficient Diestro from a beginner Diestro in a very simple way. The beginner Diestro starts the fight with the technique he will try to do in his mind, whereas the proficient Diestro does the technique that is best suited to a given situation, and then name the technique he has just performed. When the student when the student works this way in dynamic exercise in which they try to apply a theoretical notion and not a gesture. Build in their semantic memory a catalog of combat situation. Thus, when we work in a more classic way on technique to perform an ataro or a diversion or a transfer or whatever, they link this gesture to combat situations they have already encountered, and they will be able to reuse it later. Just to say an example, using the diversion, pushing the opponent's blade by making a violent and remission movement when the opponent's blade is on top of yours is, I will say, not natural for people. But when you learn to control the plane, at the beginning, everybody pushes the blade on one side. But when you feel that your opponent is pushing on the blade, with the video, I explain just very easily, you can also move up your hand and put your point down to control the plane. So they did transferred and diversion before knowing it. So when they learn to do correctly the motion, they already know the situation. They will use it later in combat. I also have other examples that we may speak out later of the question, for example, about the misunderstanding of theory or the importance of theory, turning around the opponent while walking, the use of the right angle position, or the expression I've heard a lot of time, against this opponent, ataro don't work. I always answer, if it doesn't work, it can be an attack. This need I have to conceptualize come, I think, from magic. In a previous life, before being a teacher and a fencer, I lived several years as a professional magician. Magicians have in common with fencers that they hope to find the trick that is truly magical, like fencer to find the botta secreta, the secret technique that will make them invincible, because with this botta secreta, you will kill the opponent each time. We hope to find botta secreta, I look at you and you're dead. And rather than working in depth, you can say, to hard work on theory of fencing, which is long, but I think it's not difficult. One learns catalog of technique without ever really mastering one. I learn a technique, I try to use it in combat, it doesn't work, and I don't understand why, because I've worked on it for at least 10 minutes. We quickly quickly deduce that the technique is not good, and we learn another one, which we imagine will be more deadly and devastating than the previous one. I'm not mocking those kind of diestro. I've been one of those diestros. Whereas magicians are always working on a trick without ever having a single one completed, fencers are always working or searching new technique without really mastering one. My friend Robin Truchon is a good fencer. Anyone who has ever fought against him has had the feeling of oppression that you feel when you faced a fencer who controls a weapon all the time. However, by his own admission, he only used 3 techniques: the shoulder thrust from Ataro 1, the quarter circle sugar truss from Ataro 3, and La General de Flaqueza de Barro la Fuerza from Ataro 4. It is not much, but it is enough to kill anyone. On the other hand, he knows all the time which medio he is in. He controls the first vertical plane all the time. He uses the lever of the weapon to be strong, and he attacks at the right moment. He don't know a lot of technique, but I will not pretend that he mastered time, distance, and contact, but he's very good in analyzing time, distance, and contact. This approach, which places theory on the same level as practice in learning fencing, is also very interesting for the teacher. It simplifies the analysis of practice by only using 3 criterion: time, distance, and contact. All mistakes made, not all, but maybe 95% of mistakes made, result of an error of time, distance, or contact. When a gesture is or a technique is badly performed, there is 2 ways of correcting it. I will say the technical way and the conceptual way. The technical way is to correct the bad execution of the gesture, and the conceptual way is to correct the misunderstanding of fencing. Let's take a simple example. When a fence performs a thrust, the arm must be extended when the impact happens. If it's not the case, the master can correct the gesture, can correct the gesture technical mistake by explaining, oh, you have to have your arm extended at the end of the thrust, as often as you wish, until the conceptual mistake is not resolved. The student will not be able to do the technique correctly. If the arm is bent, this is either due to an error of timing. He moves the body before having placed the arm at the right angle, or an error of distance. He tries to touch the opponent when the forward foot touches the floor, and in real, when it is correct, you have to touch your opponent when your rear foot touch the floor. So this is an error of distance. First, you have to explain, you have to put your arm in a right angle before moving. And if it's not the solution, you have to say, oh, your arm is bent because you move your forward feet too far. You have to do a smaller step to touch the opponent when the rear foot touches the floor. If the master explains this, the student knows the source of his error and he enriches his understanding of fencing. Second advantage for the teacher, in Annemasse we are between 12 and 15 when we train. I always teach fencing with a group of very heterogeneous levels. Oh, you're still here. Of very heterogeneous level by working on theory as explained above. The students in group of 3 are quickly autonomous and able to correct each other. This speed up their progress and leave me time to deal with other students who have other needs. Now I will explain. What follows is essentially a catalog of what I consider to be essentials to be better in Destreza. At the theoretical level, you have to know everything that allows positioning in space: pyramids, line, perpendicular planes, medios, especially to facilitate teaching and be able to describe gesture in a precise way. If my student knows the position line of Rada, I can say you have to place your blade in line 2, your arm in line 6, and your killian in line 3, and it's very easy because we have the same positioning referentials. 2, you have to know the first vertical plane, its definition, its location, and how to control it. It's paramount for the management of the fight. It allows you to know if you are in danger or not, to create time to observe and analyze. You have to know the medio de proporción and medio proporcional, to know their definition, and to be able, during the fight, to know where you are in relation to your opponent. To know the ataro beyond its simple technical execution. To put it simply, to be able to do an ataro whatever the position of the opponent's weapon. You have to know the notion of, we said un temps d'escrime in French, a fencing time. Time, I think the best translation is an action. To have a notion of time, action, and timing. Timing is the relationship between 2 or more actions. There is 3 timing. If you have action A and B, you can do A before B, B before A, or A and B together. You have to know the theory of defense, the lateral defensive plane, and the way to use it. I have to keep my opponent's point outside this plane and keep the hilt of my weapon inside this plane. Next, knowing how to protect myself in the appropriate manner. If the attack threatens part of my body above the shoulder, I protect myself with the hilt of my weapon. If the attack threatens me in the between the shoulder and the navel, I defend myself with the forte of my blade, with either the high end and the point below, or with the hand below and the point high. And finally, if the attack threatens area below the navel, I defend with the wick of my blade and the small pyramid to intercept the attack. Last, you have to know the strategy in Destreza. I must first control the plane, 2 control the blade, 3 attack. Any question is very simple. If the opponent controls the plane, I have to control it back. If he controls my weapon, I have 1 to transfer, 2 move backward to put myself out of reach of the opponent's attack, 3 doing a diversion. At the level of the fundamentals, I call the fundamentals everything that is necessary for fencing but not sufficient. Knowing how to breathe. The Hispanic master speak a little bit about it. I think Pacheco, it seems that it's in Grandeza, maybe I'm wrong. I think Pacheco speak just a little bit about breathing, but good breathing is essential. Most beginners fight without breathing in an anaerobically way. And it's not possible to analyze a combat situation if the brain is not properly oxygenated. I insist a lot on this aspect because it's often neglected when it's not simply ignored. Second, direction of the gaze, because your hand, your weapon hand, your weapon foot, and your gaze have to look always in the same direction. If you want to try the next time you are allowed to fight, if you're not in a lockdown situation, try to fight looking the belly of your opponent, and try to fight looking the throat of your opponent. You will see as when you look the belly, you will unconsciously move your hand down. And if you move your gaze up to the throat of your opponent, you will naturally move your hand up. And last, of course, you have to know how to move, and particularly the movement of the body weight. When you walk in a street, the shoulder, the upper part of the body move forward, and the leg follow to make you not fall on the floor. When you move in Destreza, you have to move your leg first, then the body of your weight moves, and this is the contrary of the what I will call standard walking. So you have to take care of the movement of the body and the circular step, the one that allows you to reach the medio proportional. This is, I think, the most important step in Destreza, because this is the one that allowed you to prepare the attack. If the move is too short, you will not be able to catch the opponent's blade. If the move is too big, your point will be not anymore threatening the opponent. And this is why lots of beginners diestro only try to touch with the taro reverse, medio taro, and medio reverse. And last, you have full position, the right angle, the inferior right angle, which is for me the default position during the fight. This is one I will call, this is now my guard position, and the position at the medio proportional of the sword side, and the position at the medio proportional of the profile side. And then you have to know at the practical level. Arrow 1, 2, 4. Hello, Clara. My daughter is hide behind me. At arrow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 2, 8. And I will say first at arrow 1, 2, 1, 3, 4, 2, and then the other one. You have to know liberation, but this work is of little importance, because in this case, this is more a question of explaining when to use it than how to use it, because liberation is often a default choice rather than a considered strategic option. You have to know then transfer, diversion, and inclusion. And this is what I do with my beginner student for at least 6 months, because liberation, transfer, diversion, and inclusion represent, with the Ataro, I will say 95% of the action done during a fight. And of course, I teach some technique from Ataro 1, the shoulder thrust, the quarter circle thrust under the arm, and the general of weakness, las generales de flaqueza debajo la fuerza, sorry, and the movimiento de conclusión. From Ataro 2, Générale des linéaires in cruz and the general las generales de flaqueza de barro encima la fuerza. From Ataro 3, the general las generales of weakness. Sorry, I'm shuffling Spanish and English in my head, and it's a real mess. General de flaqueza de bajo la fuerza, generales de estrecha, and the quarter circle thrust. And from Ataro 4, la generales de línea en cruz and la general de flaqueza de bajo la fuerza, and that's all. And for me, it's enough to work years on Destreza. Just to conclude, because it's nearly 4 in the morning, as I said, all I say is only my opinion on how to work, progress in rapier fencing. I feel, and my students feel it too, that they progress quickly and understand fencing better, much better, since I have integrated all this work on theory in my teaching. They feel they are more aware of what happened when they fight. They and me have considerably reduced how cognitive tension in combat we have gained in fluidity, speed, and subtlety. And now, the answer of the question you are all asking, will I be able to beat Pirat Robert or Inigo Montoya? The answer is clearly no, but I think that I could hold up a few SO. Thank you very much. Ready for the questions?
That was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was really good. So at this point, let's go ahead and put questions in the chat rather than unmuting and asking directly, just so we don't get all crowded trying to get questions. So we have a question that says, curious to know if you translate any of the technical words or jargon into French. Since Andre teaches in French, many of his students struggle with it. So he's curious what you do with that.
It's I will say yeah or no, it depends. There is concept of Destreza that can be translated. For example, I always use medio. I don't translate it because there is few ways to translate. In French, we can say moyen, which is mean in English. We can translate it by milieu, which is middle. And I keep medio. During a long time, I was asking, how can I translate it? A medio is a distance, an angle, and I forget during a long time, a position of safety. So I think that we can translate, the best way to translate it is milieu, middle, but in French, milieu may be the middle of something. For example, the middle of this is the middle of my pen, or you can say un milieu, like le milieu aquatique. When you live underwater, fish live in le milieu aquatique. So I think that the best way to translate medio in French is context. It's a context. So I medio. Sometimes I translate medio, taro et reverse. We have a simple word which is taille et revers, cuts and reverse cuts. When there is an easy translation, a word which means something in French and which is the same in French and in the Destreza, I sometimes translate, but in my experience, I think it's better to use the Spanish word, because if you have to speak together or with Spanish guys or whoever you want, we have the same word to explain the thing. For example, ataro in French is raccourci, a shortcut. It means nothing. So I keep ataro, and I think it's best for the student to know the word in Spanish, even if they know the translation in French.
Thank you. I think a lot of us do something similar. Do we have more questions in the chat? So I have a question while other people are thinking. You have trained a lot of students. When your students go out to compete, do you find that they're able to successfully use the Destreza that you teach them?
I haven't teach a lot of students, and in my teaching, and I would say in the philosophy of my group, we avoid tournament, because for me, if I do a tournament, I will try to score points, and a tournament has rules. For example, I've seen a rule of tournament some time ago, and if you touch the head, you have 3 points. If you touch the chest, you have 3 points. If you touch the belly, you have 2 points. If it's an arm, you have just 1 point. And if I try to score points, I'm not trying to protecting me. When you play, when you fight with a rule, you will always try to use those rules to make more points. I can, for example, grasp the opponent's blade with my left hand. So my opponent score a point, and I'm going to thrust him to the head and score 3 points. I know that some masters in the treatise explain that maybe you may have a little injury to the left hand to kill your opponent, but there is a difference between a little injury and grasping the blade, knowing that you will in real lose your hand to score 3 points by striking your opponent to the face. So we don't do tournament, but when we do some meetings, we are not ridiculous. Second, we never fight like goats. I will precise. Some of rapier fencing I see 2 people there, generally out of distance, playing the tip, and one time they jump like 2 goats. Nothing happen, or they strike with they give them they strike with the hand, or I don't know, and jump back, and there is nothing. Jump back, and when we fight, I don't know if it's efficient, but it's not less efficient than other thing. But there is a criterion that is important. All the master in all the treaties explain the importance of the feeling of the blade. And most of the time, when I see rapier fencing, which is not Destreza, there is no blade contact. They're just relying, I think, on speed. That's why they're just playing with the tip, and I jump. When I see Destreza fencer, and it's why we try to do in Annemasse, we keep the blade contact all the time, and we are now able to work a little bit on the feeling of the blade. But to answer the question about the tournament, we never do tournament in Annemasse, but sometimes we do a championnat. A tournament, it's when you fight against someone, and if you lose, you're eliminated. Championnat, everybody is going to fight against everybody. And we do sometimes a championnat. This is the same in English? Championnat?
We don't distinguish it that way. We have different formats of tournaments and championships.
Championship, yeah, thank you. We do championship, and the rule is one touch and the opponents win. And when you're touched, you say to your opponent, okay, you touched me, and your opponent takes or not the touch. Just to take an example, we fought with Robin some times ago, and he touched me to the leg. So I say, okay, you win, you touch me to the leg. And I say, no, I don't want it. It was because my blade was here, but it wasn't a volunteer. It wasn't a touch I want. Yeah, it was by luck that I touched, so I don't want it. And so everybody meets everybody, and at the end there is a winner. But this way oblige you to put your ego outside, to say, okay, you have touched me, and you give the opportunity to your opponent to say, okay, it's a nice shot, I take it, or no, it's not a nice shot, I don't want it. And this is, for me, the best way to tournament or championship. To just move back a last word about tournament. Tournament implies most of the time ego. And if there is ego, for me, if there is ego, Destreza is death. Because you are trying to be stronger, you will try to touch your opponent, whatever it costs.
So it sounds like you're making a cause argument about what the goal of Destreza is, the final cause of the tradition. So maybe I could ask, you said that it's supposed to make you a better fencer and a better person. When you do bouting,
what I do, sorry,
when you are fencing,
yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what the final cause is? What is the goal of the fencing?
We try to do good fencing. For me, two good diestros will fight. One will, and after they go to drink a beer and discuss about fencing. There is a sentence of Maestro Aitor Blanco from Spain, which, in my humble opinion, is the best diestro in the world. He's a very good fencer. He's a very good teacher. He knows. He has an encyclopedic knowledge of Destreza, and he's a very, very nice guy. Always says the opponent's death is just a consequence. And I think this is a very fantastic sentence, because now when I fight, I keep in mind that the opponent's death is just a consequence. I try to do my best to respect all the principles of Ataro, to respect my opponent, to be I will say elegant when I fight. For me, it's more important to fight with someone and to do something that is elegant to see than to win. It was I remember we fought at the Dijon's meeting with Robin a few years ago, and we were just warming up, playing to controlling the plane, and we are not just trying to fight, just controlling the plane. And I will not say lots of people, but there were people around you looking at us, because we were just I will say talking with sword and not trying to hit each other. There is no. We were walking. It was just smooth, and it was pleasant for me. I'm sure it was pleasant for Robin, and we don't care about touching each other. And I think that's since I try to explain in English in my head. I will say I touch more easily my opponent since I don't try to touch him. Because if I'm focused on touching my opponent, I'm focused on a forthcoming moment. I'm thinking of what will happen in just few seconds when I will headshot him, and I will be the stronger because I've put on headshot. I try to be in the moment. I'm in the moment. I'm controlling my plane. I try to keep the opponent's point out of my defensive plane. Oh, I am at the medio de proporción. I can do an ataro. Oh, okay. There's an opportunity to strike. I try to strike. He defends. Okay, I continue. And I think you cannot really correctly fence as long as you're trying to touch your opponent. There's an example, I will say a classic example, with the medio de proporción. This is a technique I teach soon, because it's not a difficult technique, because you don't need a real sense of timing to do them. A nice thrust, you need to feel correctly the distance and the timing. And medio de proporción, el movimiento de conclusión, if you have the good distance, it's easy to do. But when you teach it to newbie diestro, they think, oh, that's so great, I have to do it. And they begin the fight, and they have the fact that I'm going to disarm my opponent. And they only have this in mind. They are not able to analyze what happened. They're just waiting to jump and grab the sword. And sometimes, if they were better, if they take time to analyze the situation, maybe they will just touch the opponent to the arm, or wound him to the chest, or whatever. But as long as you have a technique in head, you will try to there is the reality is the fight. Your representation is I'm going to do this technique, and you have to force the reality to do this technique, which is not the good one, maybe in this context. If you free from the technique, if you don't have any technique particular you want to do, you're aware of what happened. Okay, I have an opportunity to do medial levels to the arm. It's not the more prestigious technique, but it's a technique. I won my opponent. I'm safe, and that's okay. Clear?
Yeah, I think it's really clear. One of the things that we talk about to see in a fencer, we want to see flow state, where the technique flows naturally out of the fencer without a plan necessarily, but responsive to the situation. And I like the way that you outlined the cause, because it sounds like the fight that you would describe, it's not so much about creating touches, but about finding a flow state. And inside that flow state, you create beautiful fencing, the two of you together. And I think that's something, you might be the first person to really talk about that, but I think a lot of us, when we're fencing, it's something that we're really seeking. So it speaks to me personally, for sure. And I expect that most of the other people also agree with that. We had a question about your research. So do you feel that going back to earlier texts like Pacheco or Carranza or Errard helps you to better understand Rada? Or do you think that Rada as itself a text is functionally complete enough that you get what you need out of it?
I think it's not the rude way. Reading Pacheco is a major pain in the neck, because I will stay polite, and I've read Eternat first. I read Eternat first, and I really love this text because it's there is lots of principle. I think it's very difficult to understand it if you haven't at least a little experience in Destreza. For me, read everything in Rada. I've read other texts. Grandeza. I've tried to. I've read Examinar los maestros de Pacheco. Las 100 conclusiones, I think it's very interesting because it's always a conceptual approach. But yes, thank you, Puck, modo fácil. But for me, Rada is enough. I read other texts because I think it's interesting. I take notes, but I was not mad enough to try to translate Pacheco. And the last reason is a little advertisement for Iliar Martinez. I fought with Iliar Martinez rapiers, which are the Rada's rapier. And I have the tool to work with the treatise I'm working on. So while searching elsewhere, as I explain from one text to another, they globally say the same thing. There's no medio proporcional in Pacheco because the blade were shorter and heavier than the Rada's blade, but they say the same thing. You have to control the plane, control the blade, and attack. And now I feel legitimate to speak about Destreza and to teach Destreza, I will say, for just a couple of months. I've said on Facebook just a few months ago, I think that I did Destreza for the first time. It was just a few days ago because now I have the feeling that in my head, I understand the complex system. So some of my friends practice longsword, and I don't practice longsword, but one day I was with them and I fight with them, and now I understand the system, so I use a longsword, and I've used my theory of Destreza to apply it to a longsword. I've controlled the center line, I've tried to control the blade, and so on, and I wasn't ridiculous, and it was one of the first time I fought with a longsword, because now it's clear, and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not sure that I will learn lots of things in Pacheco that Rada haven't explained. Maybe I'm wrong, but reading Grandeza or Nueva Ciencia, taking maybe 2 years to read it just to find 3 more techniques, maybe someone, if there is a scent of the Destreza, someone who will be, I don't want to be Saint Sébastien of the Destreza, the one who have read all the text. Rada is complete, clear from it enough.
That's good. And we should have warned you that whenever anyone says something mean about Pacheco, we all have to take a drink.
Yeah,
it is a game. I know that Tim Rivera is working on translating Pacheco's Grandeza.
Yeah.
And I think by the time he's done, he may try to go find Pacheco's grave and drive a stake through his heart. Tim is not a big fan. Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat, and we have kept you up 20 minutes past the end of the lecture. So I just want to wrap it up, but it's been a real pleasure hearing you speak and getting to meet you. And I know that we have some people that are big fans of Rada who made a point of getting to this lecture. So I know that they're very pleased. So thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing your expertise.
Thank you very much for hosting me. I will put all the text on internet, so if you want to read it, it will be online.
Perfect.
Thank you very much for hosting me.
Yeah.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
And,
thank you.
Next week we will have Ernesto Maldonado, who's going to be giving us a lecture as well. All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. And stay safe, Sébastien. It was very nice meeting you.
Bye.
Bye.